Oh. All right. All right. 33 minutes onto this one. Let's go here. So, right. Free trade arguments, welfare maximization, trade war possibilities, and makes other countries better too, which is nice. Let me put this into here. And okay, so tariff arguments against free trade, supply chain dependencies. For do against this is just going to be a shortened version. Boom. Yeah. Like I don't see this as a clear argument against. Because I wonder if we can find something like what would it be under? Like if two countries are interdependent, wouldn't that de-incentivize going to war? And that stability, wouldn't that stability? I would expect that stability to be good for businesses in general. Like like I don't know, like my super basic understanding of business is, we would generally like stability and predictability. And if there's like good reasons to expect, two countries to really not want to go to war because they have a lot of interdependency, that's nice. Maybe you feel more comfortable investing investing in capital or something, because you have a lot more assurity in your supply chains, that your supply chains aren't going to be screwed with by some war. I don't know. I bet this must be a whole field. What would it be? There would be some effects of supply chain interdependency upon what would it be? Countries, reduction in war. I don't know. In war, I don't know. I'm sure there's some economic dependency. So what? Likelihood of war. T and F online. Can this please load? Net is having issues. There we go. Why is this taking longer? Why? I don't know. Okay. Reload that. I guess systematic literature review. International political relations have been long concerned about the relationship between economic independence and likelihood of war. Based on a systematic literature review, this paper investigates how globalization and increased economic interactions post-World War II have influenced global conflict dynamics. Yeah, this sounds like an interesting one to read. The review contrasts liberal and realist. I don't know what realist is. Schools of thought, with liberals suggesting that economic interdependencies reduces war likelihood due to high opportunity costs due to disrupted trade. Using similar arguments, the realists propose a positive relationship, arguing that war has minimal impact on trade. The view reconciles the different perspectives through a detailed examination of various studies. Highlighting the neglected effect of moderator variables in interpreting results. What are moderator variables? Also discusses the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine on global food crises and economic dynamics, illustrating the contemporary relevance of this topic. This paper concludes by summarizing results and highlighting the influence of potential moderator variables on a relationship. I guess moderator as in like moderating. On the relationship between economic independence and war likelihood. Okay, this. This seems, 2025. Okay, what's this one? This one I really want to read after micro and macroecon. After micro and macroecon. Hold on, let me get the title again. But that's interesting. Anyway, we're up to 33. And 33. Here we go.
Worse off. Okay? The problem is we haven't done that.
We haven't done that as in we haven't compensated the losers of the transfer and surplus. So when we have a export, when we have exports, when we have imports, some of the consumer surplus is transferred from producers to consumers, but because it's net gain, even with that transfer, well, why can't we take some of that net gain and give it to producers, and which would result in everyone being better off, and not just consumers for imports and then producers for exports. But we haven't done that, and I imagine that's quite difficult.
In theory, it works. In practice, we don't do it. And this is made no more evident than by the fascinating research of my colleague, David Autor.
Oh, right.
David Autor, who's an outstanding labor economist, has looked at what happened around the U.S. due to rising imports from China. And basically, it's a very clever study where he looks at industries. Basically, Chinese imports became much cheaper after we passed the free trade agreement. It looks at industries that were more and less susceptible to Chinese imports and where they're located. And what he found was the industries that were most susceptible to Chinese imports basically got crushed. And those communities lost millions and millions of jobs. Now, at the same time, life for consumers was great. This is basically how Walmart functions. Okay? I was like, I've got this sweater here. Okay, this sweater, you can't really see it. It's a nice, it's a mediocre sweater. Okay? This sweater probably cost me, I don't know, $30. Okay, when I was a kid, when prices were a third of what they are now, this sweater would cost me maybe $40. Okay? Would be 120 in today's dollars. Why? Because of imports from China. Because when I was a kid, that had to be made in North Carolina, in our textile mills in North Carolina, and they were more expensive. Now we get it from China, it's cheap. The textile guys no longer have jobs. Well, the easy answer is tax me on my sweater. Imagine if with this $30 sweater, they imposed a $15 tax. Well, I'd still be way better off than I would have been without trade. This would have been $120 without trade, so I'm still way better off. And that money could have compensated all the textile workers who lost their jobs. Everybody wins, but we didn't do it. As a result, while theoretically we can make everybody better off, in practice, we haven't. And that has led to a lot of opposition to free trade. Okay? This gets into a big issue, which is, well, gee, couldn't we just help these textile workers some other way? And we'll talk in a couple lectures about that. That's about redistribution policy. But in practice, that's what leads to the opposition. Yeah? That's a great question. So that's the other argument for free trade. Actually, I should put that as another argument. This sort of related to the trade war argument for free trade, which is that basically the idea is economists say, here's another way to think about this. The road workers lose their jobs. If we train them to be computer workers, then everybody's better off. The road workers move into a better sector. Computer workers make more than road workers.
But it's hard to... Not so easy just to retrain people.
Consumers in the U.S. get cheaper roses. Everybody wins. So the way you could do this is by literally just retraining workers. But that takes money, and we didn't do it. And a lot of workers, turns out, it's hard to become a computer programmer, okay? Or be electrical engineer, you're all studying to do that. Okay, it's hard for these people who didn't grow up with proper education or work in the rose sector to do that. So as a result, in theory, you can do that. In practice, we didn't. So that's a second big reason people oppose free trade. And the third reason people oppose free trade, I already talked about last lecture.
Yeah, well, I guess this is like it could be an argument for or against. So like, it would be an argument for free trade if the field impacted was maybe like if for whatever reason, like it's really easy to retrain workers from that field to another field, and if that other field was way nicer, like was a much nicer job. So what we and so like if we're thinking about this on the spectrum, like if like the harder it is to retrain, to upskill or to change skill, to retrain, and the less difference there is, well, like the change in quality of the work itself. Yeah. So yeah. So really, this is either, basically, can be an argument for or against. Free trade, depending on factors like how difficult it is to retrain the impact the workers, and whether the the quality of the jobs they be retrained into. This would be time, money. Aging workers, possibly, or yeah. And then, like, I guess it's like, quality of, like, how much a job sucks or not, like the quality of life of the work, of the type of work.
Which is socially damaging comparative advantage. And I talked about that last lecture with Chinese battery plant and the fact they built this battery plant, and since they
put this down to here. And then, yeah.
They have no environmental regulations. The stuff leaks.
Hold on, let me get back a little bit.
Second big reason people oppose free trade. And the third reason people oppose free trade, I already talked about last lecture, which is socially damaging comparative advantage. And I talked about that last lecture.
Right.
With Chinese battery plant and the fact they built this battery plant, and since they have no environmental regulations, the stuff leaked and killed a bunch of people. Okay? That's the third issue. Finally, the last issue, and the most controversial, is trade as a foreign policy tool. Which is, we have many reasons, okay, to be mad at China. There's many reasons Trump was mad at China. Now, some were irrational. Trump was upset about our trade deficit with China. As I said, that's just a peak.
But this also could be for and against, right? As we looked at, in thinking about the interdependency of supply chains and its effects on war.
Get you deficit. We shouldn't care.
Or
okay?
Conflict.
But Trump had legitimate reasons for being mad at China. For example, we have a larger world trade system under the World Trade Organization that, as I said, is like a club that imposes a set of free trade rules to try to have welfare maximizing trade around the world. China's been violating the rules of that organization repeatedly. Over and over again, China's been doing things which violate the rules. So, for example, it says you can't import any goods into China that aren't, you could have foreign goods in China, but they must be produced in Chinese factories. Well, that's not free trade. If you say you can't have computers sold in China by American companies unless you come here and build a factory here in China. You can own it in America, but you got to come here and employ Chinese workers to build a factory here. Well, that's against the rules of the WTO. That's against the free trade agreement. And China's been doing that for years. There's also significant industrial espionage. Now, I'm not saying we don't do it too, but there's a lot of evidence of the fact that free trade has opened up the exposure of our companies to other countries, and they've been studying and copying our methods.
Mm.
And that's another reason, that's another kind of bad behavior we should be worried about. These are significant problems. So you might say, well, gee, China's a bad actor. Why not then slap a tariff on them? Why isn't...
Well, isn't this also... Well, It's tricky to say if this is for and against or both, because, like, if we're thinking about it in terms of, if we say, like, any industrial espionage anywhere benefiting anyone is bad, then this is an argument against. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of it's good if it benefits your country, then, and bad if it's if you're leaking tech So I guess it depends on like, what were like good. I guess it's good and bad in terms of the effects, the economic effects on your country versus, I guess, morally. Leave it as this for now.
Isn't that the right answer? And it turns out it's a bad answer as a way of getting back at this problem. For three reasons. There's three.
Hold on.
So you might say, well, gee, China's a bad actor. Why not then slap a tariff on them? Why isn't that the right answer? And it turns out it's a bad answer as a way of getting back at this problem. For three reasons. There's three reasons why using trade restrictions as a tool of foreign policy makes no sense. Okay? Reason one is the standard welfare analysis, which is sure, you strike back at China, but along the way you hurt American consumers. Okay? Indeed, there was a lot of evidence that the price of goods.
Right. So, okay. So he's arguing that like this is never. Put it here.
That were produced using Chinese parts went through the roof once Trump, not through the roof, but went up a lot once Trump raised his tariffs. So that's the first argument. The second argument is that it's not even clear how you do this, because what is made in China?
Yeah. It's difficult to...
Take a car where the construction of the body's in the US, but all the components come from China. Is that a Chinese good or an American good? And if you impose a tariff on that, you're hurting American car companies. They use that as an input in their production, which will kill American jobs. So you're actually, the idea of a tariff is to protect American jobs, but the tariff doesn't make it more expensive, the inputs that Americans need for their jobs. You actually hurt American jobs. Okay? So that's the second argument. The third argument is you need coordination, which is the U.S. isn't the only
to target China without sort of collateral damage.
Party that trades with China.
Yeah.
The U.S. is not the only party that trades with China. So suppose you're trading your Pokemon with your friends, but your friend has a bunch of people he's trading with, and you decide because your friend pissed you off you won't trade with him. He'll just trade the cards to someone else. Now, he might not get quite as good a deal, but it's not suddenly like he can't trade his cards. He's just got to trade them with someone else. And basically, that's what happened, is China just started selling their goods to other countries. So basically, the reason that this was a bad way to approach our problems with China was it's bad for American consumers, it might be bad for American producers, and it doesn't do much if you don't coordinate internationally. That's why most economists who are smart in this area said we should have serious trade repercussions against China. We should think about...
But then, like, on the flip side, you know, I guess, I mean, these are reasons why it's difficult, but if you could overcome, I mean, you can overcome these two, right? If the country, like, depending on the country, like, if they have, like, one specific good that they're exporting or whatever, right? Then you basically say, okay, I'm going to eat the cost of the welfare analysis cost. Because, like whatever I'm trying to get them to do, like, or whatever rules I'm trying to get them to fall in line with the, like, whatever international trade rules, are worth it, are worth the welfare analysis, or are worth the welfare cost. But then, like, yeah, so doesn't this mean that it that it can be a good solution, provided points 2 and 3 are met, and the cost of the welfare loss is worth whatever benefit we're trying to get out of the country, targeted country. Like, you know, suppose you have a welfare loss for like 5-10 years or whatever, but because you've shown that you're willing to impose restrictions, now the country falls in line with whatever the global trade community rules have set forth, like, you know, like anti-espionage or whatever. And it also serves as an example to all of the other communities. Basically, like specific and general deterrence in law. But on global scale, benefits. Anyway, that would be interesting to read about.
Barriers to trade with China, but it has to be done in an internationally coordinated way. And that wasn't what was done. So basically, you end up with fairly ineffective trade barriers on China. Okay? Now, the latest attempt of this, to use trade as a foreign policy tool, was sanctions on Russian oil. Not allowing people to buy Russian oil because of the Ukraine war. Once again, this didn't work so well because other countries were still rising. Other countries were still buying. Okay? And that's A. And B, this became incredibly painful for Europe because Europe depended so much on Russia for their fuel. And the question is, are you going to break apart the European coalition because they don't want to keep placing such high prices for fuel? Okay? On the other hand, if you tell countries they can't export goods to Russia, that might be more effective because that makes life miserable in Russia. Maybe they'll throw off their leader. They probably won't. But that would be another way you could approach it. So these are really interesting and difficult issues to think through, and exciting to think about how we can once again use the tools of microeconomics to come at this.
Yeah.
Questions about that? Yeah.
Long question.
It's a great point. So the trade war, you're asking about this argument. The trade war argument is less powerful if you're talking about a tiny country where we don't really sell them much. Now, North Korea is different. We have that's sanctions. That's just we won't deal with them. But if you think about a small country, if you think about suddenly we got mad, think about Colombia. They don't buy that many computers. Okay? So you might say this argument is not super relevant if the country's small. Okay, I agree with that. Okay, let me talk about one other, since I haven't been controversial enough today, let's talk about one other non-controversial topic, which is immigration. Immigration. The same set of principles that applies to the free flow of goods applies to the free flow of workers. So look at figure 19.8. Think about producing fruit in the US.
YouTube. I just want to take a screenshot. YouTube. Okay.
Okay. Originally, in
oh, that's right. If I do Control-Alt-E, yes. Paste, yes. But there's still not an easy way to make this nice and full screen.
Under autarky, we have L1 workers.
L1, labor force 1. Wage one. One sec. Okay. Okay, good. Okay.
So this is, I'm sorry. 19 is not the market for fruit. 19 is not the market for fruit. This is unclear. This is a bit unclear. 19 is the labor market for people producing fruit. Very clear. 19.8 is the labor market diagram in fruit production. 19.9 is the fruit market. Well, what's happened? I just showed you in 19.8 that the... Well, what's happened?
Right, for fruit with immigrants. Higher quantity produced, lower price. Yeah.
Happened. I just showed you in 19.8
and greater supply
that the wage went down. If the wage goes down, marginal cost goes down. So the supply curve shifts out from S1 to S2. What does that do? It allows more fruit at a lower price. So this is why economists generally favor relatively free immigration. Because by having immigrants come in and do jobs, we allow goods to produce more cheaply, and it creates consumer surplus. Okay? On the other hand, figure 19.8 is why many people in America don't like immigration.
Yeah.
Which is the wage falls. So it's once again a standard trade-off, much like trade. By allowing immigrants in, we allow more consumer surplus through cheaper fruit, but we lower the wage that workers get in the fruit-producing sector. And I don't need to go through the graphs to show you that the former dominates the latter. Overall, we're better off with immigration. Now, we're only overall better off immigration, however, if we can make some mechanisms to compensate the losers. If we, for example, said, well, look, we're now going to tax fruit. Fruit's cheaper. We're going to tax fruit and give the money to the former fruit producers.
So this is a net gain. Yeah, obviously. It's a net gain and surplus because like the gain and surplus right versus however have well
then that would work. But we're not doing it. If we, for example, said, well, look, we're now going to tax fruit. Fruit's cheaper. We're going to tax fruit and give the money to the former fruit producers, then that would work. But we're not.
Not former fruit producers, but former workers in the fruit market? Or maybe the same thing. Yeah, I guess the same thing.
Not doing it. We're not doing anything to help those fruit producers. Okay? So the question is, how big a problem is this? And there's actually a number of really good studies of how does immigration affect domestic wages and prices. What they find is more immigration does lower prices.
I was wondering, I thought he was going to cite some studies.
What they find is more immigration does lower prices. What they also find is more immigration doesn't much lower, has, if anything, a negligible effect on the wages of U.S.-born workers. Relatively small effect, which could be for two reasons. One reason could be because of elasticities. The other could be because they're in sectors that people don't want to work in. People don't want to pick fruit. They don't want to work at the gas station or the 7-Eleven. Okay? So basically, this is one reason I'm not lowering wages is because these are jobs people didn't want. Okay? But here's the fascinating fact. One group does get hurt by more immigration. The previous immigrants. So people who actually hurt by this, the group for which wages fall, are the last generation of immigrants, because they are working in those sectors. This leads to the fascinating paradox at the heart of a concern in politics that many have on the left, which is, gee, why are immigrants turning against the Democratic Party, turning against free trade, turning against free immigration? Why don't immigrants, the Democrats are clearly the party of much freer immigration than the Republicans, yet they're losing immigrant votes. Well, actually, it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because the future immigrants are going to hurt the wage of the existing immigrants. So it kind of makes sense. It's sort of a pull the ladder up.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, can I turn this? Auto. That's tricky. Workers who had their wages reduced by taxing fruit, but in practice we don't. 4739. Okay, why is this? Okay. I wonder how true this is for Australia, because he's talking from the US perspective. Excuse me. Okay. What are we doing? What are we doing? Let me restart my stream.